Some people listen on YouTube. Some people on Spotify. Some people on Apple or Google. And I'm gonna tell you why. You're gonna find R&B pod wherever you search. One of these days, I promise you that we are gonna sell merch. Some people listen to R&B podcasts. How about you? This is what we do every Thursday for you. Welcome back to R&B podcast with Russ, with Blake. Oh God, I'm Blake.
I'm Russ.
Nice to talk to you.
Yes, yes.
Thank you all for joining us. Thank God for the opportunity to have another conversation. Excited for this one because your boy's 27.
Mm-hmm.
I had a birthday yesterday. I feel blessed. Not too much different. Been blessed.
Happy belated birthday.
Thank you.
27, that's big.
Appreciate it. Yeah.
Just like Father's Day, I'm sure you felt super appreciated.
Yeah.
Super loved.
Yeah. All weekend I did.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, time is a beautiful thing. You think about 27 years, how different I was 10 years ago as a 17-year-old. I graduated high school when I was 17. And now I'm a dad and a husband and a business owner and all these things. And those aren't things that I anticipated happening within a 10-year span. Yeah. If you asked me when I was graduating high school, definitely not. So it's very interesting how time plays a role in our perspective and how things change over time and how we grow. We've talked about having a growth mindset and, being motivated through that and maintaining that growth mindset. And what we experience as individuals, I think, happens at scale much larger, regardless of what context you're talking about us experiencing, whether it's despair. We have awful things happen in our individual life. There's awful things that happen on a global scale, right? Mm-hmm. You talk about success, you reach your accomplishment just for you. There can be a whole country that does something that hasn't been done for a nation, right? Mm-hmm. So our experience as individuals moving through time, I believe that we, from conception to the day we die, in between, we evolve. We experience evolution within ourselves, right? Mm. But obviously there's a different topic of evolution that most people think of, us transforming from a caveman, Neanderthal, into the intelligent beings that we are today. But I think that those things are very interrelated. So I'd like to discuss that a bit today.
Yeah. Beautiful topic.
Mm-hmm.
Beautiful
Thanks.
topic.
Appreciate it.
And it expands in so many different ways. You get into like science and universal theories of space-time continuum, and then to what you're speaking of, just evolution of human beings, how we evolve in our own life, and the key ingredient is time. We've talked about how people will try to manifest big goals in their life, and there's a simple equation. That's the vision plus the time and work that you put in.
Yeah, and it's crazy. The longer time we experience, the more precious it seems. But at the same time, the less significant small bits seem. You know what I mean? So it's like, if you're 50 years old, you understand how much can happen over the course of a year because you know that a lot can happen over the course of a month. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, you start seeing time as a finite thing, once you pass that middle age point, and all of a sudden you have less years to live than you've already lived, right? Mm-hmm. And most people don't know when that is, but 50 is like a good, I guess, assumption number for the average person, I would say, if you take care of yourself.
Sure.
And I think that's good for people our age to take into consideration because, again, from me 27 much different than 17. And we live in a world where we see so many things so fast, all this information available to us, and we think that we can utilize it and absorb it and put it out into the world and accomplish all these things. But realistically, we need to let time run its course and understand that 10 years is long to us, right? It's more than a third of what we've experienced. But if we just be patient in what we're trying to do and let another 10 years go by, then we're going to be much further than what we can really conceptualize at this point. And that's why I like talking about time, because I'm more of a concepts person, and time is not tangible. Time is not real. It's a concept, right? It was constructed so that there's more order in our society. So I'm very appreciative of said concept. And, you know, me working with the human body, there's a lot of systems within the body, and those interrelate with each other through concepts. And so being able to think more in that way rather than, I think you do well with facts and concrete knowledge, but I like how those things interrelate with each other. And so time is like an intermediary with all these experiences that we're having, right?
Yeah.
Because I can't give you more time, but a lot of times we say we don't have the time.
Sure. All you can do is change my perspective on what time is. You can't give somebody more time, but you can change their perspective on what time is.
Yeah. So perspective is the key there, as with mostly everything.
Right.
I was telling you, I watched the interview with Kevin Hart and Jay-Z. Amazing interview. If anybody watches Heart to Heart on Peacock, 10 out of 10 recommend. Check out the one with Jay-Z. Kevin Hart told Jay-Z that he respects his time and he didn't want to ask him for favors frequently or anything like that. And he's asking him to do this because he felt like it was important, right?
Yeah.
I wondered if he respects his time because we feel like our time is finite. Like, would we respect each other's time as much if we thought we were going to live forever, right?
Yeah.
Because I've heard people say, well, I have all of these goals that I want to accomplish within my lifespan, right? So we feel kind of rushed because there's going to be a feeling of, I guess, not being content with yourself, possibly. But we get so fixated on these goals and don't realize that if we are faced with death, if we do come to the end of the line, a lot of those goals really aren't as important as we think they are.
No.
Right?
No, and what we did with our time is the most important thing, you know.
Exactly.
And Kevin Hart probably feels that reverence for Jay-Z's time because Jay-Z feels the reverence for his own time. You know what I'm saying? We usually will show respect for someone to the level that they respect themselves. And when you are making as many moves as Jay-Z is out here, a lot of times I think we can think of it as, oh, they have a lot of money, so they're a busy person.
And time is money.
And time is money. And time is really the best resource that we have.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? I like how you kind of pointed to that 50-year-old who started to live they've lived that long, so now they see time as a different thing. But they've probably seen friends pass and family members pass, so they also understand that it's just not owed to you. And that's a big revelation as a person in their 20s to be able to kind of shift your mindset to that. Almost lets you live as if you were going to pass away tomorrow, but with a young, healthy body. And to me, that's a very freeing and liberating idea.
Yeah, but you have to balance between it, right? Because some people think that way and they might neglect some of their responsibilities today. It's like, well, I don't know if I'm going to live tomorrow. Like, why worry about that, right?
For sure.
And
this is
be diligent.
Yeah, and this is like a hard concept for people to deal with, because usually when you're young and something happens, family member passes away, things like that, where you recognize that time is so valuable and fleeting and life is the same way, a lot of times it can make us go into a dark place because we feel like it's not supposed to work this way.
Right.
And that's kind of the first step towards accepting reality, which is that, no, this time is it's golden. It's beautiful when you have it, but just like everything, you're not going to keep it.
Yeah. That's part of our personal evolution. As we experience more time, regardless of what direction it pushes us in, we will have a different understanding and have to evolve our perspective when it comes to that time.
Definitely.
Like you said, time is a resource. I say time is money. Money is a resource. They're both tools and they're both concepts.
Yeah.
You know, we didn't have money since the beginning of man. Eventually, somebody came up with the concept of money, right? Eventually somebody came up with the concept of time. And then these are two things that the average person allows to dictate their life, right? And they are very important because, again, we have responsibilities we have to be aware of. There's limited time in the day from sunrise to sunset. We have to sleep in between. And we do have to spend our time to get the resource of the money, right?
Yeah. And we can cause just as much anxiety in us if we're trying to grab on to the time and keep it for ourselves. The same way with money. If you become greedy with the money and you believe that your money is literally personally you and you're going to keep it, then it can cause anxiety because that's not the nature of anything out here. So you're like going to be not in harmony with the way that this actually works. And it's the same concept with time.
Yeah, that's a good point. We definitely have to be aware of what we identify with and what we hold near and dear to us.
For sure.
And a lot of people take pride in the effort that they put forward to obtain the money. And they take pride in the time that they spent to do something that it took to gain these resources, you know, and to get to the point where they are and to get them living the lifestyle that they want and being able to provide for their family. Like those are all things that someone should take pride in, but they just have to find a way to be able to disconnect from the grind a little bit, disconnect from the reward, and be more present with what's going on within themselves without all the concepts that have been constructed around them.
Man, very true. And honestly, we are time, right? We show time on our face. We show time in our posture. And they talk about as you get older, you start to get shorter and things of this nature. Like we literally are keeping time with our bodies.
Yeah.
You know, so it's just something that's really interesting to think about how once you enter this world, you're born and everything, now you are mimicking it until you're gone.
Yep. And our cells are aging always, and our cells are dying and they slough off. Our skin, it replicates, right? So like you said, the time is taking a process within us. We're discussing how, you know, physics are the same, quote unquote, over span of time, whether someone's moving or standing still, like the physics taking place are the same. But I also made the point that, again, physics is something that we have constructed with our understanding and the data we have in our minds. And as we evolve as people and the world evolves around us, even physics changes and evolves, right? We might not understand how. We might not be able to see what's taking place or changing, but everything as we know it is changing over time. And we call that an aging process, right?
Yeah.
And we live in a world now where it's very popular to try to combat the aging process, which to an extent I agree with. You have to do things to keep yourself youthful as far as your body and your mind so that you can live a good quality of life for as long as you can. But there are some things that we can't combat, and there's some things that we have to accept at a certain point in our lives. And those stages of life should really be cherished, because I always try to remind my patients who tell me, hey, don't get old or it sucks to age. Like, I know there's aspects of that that are not enjoyable, especially when you compare it with the life that you were living at a different time in a different point in time, right? But what has to be recognized is that not everyone has the experience of that much time, you know? So if you really ask yourself, would I have rather ended my life at 40 years old or live as an elderly person into my 80s, we can't let the inevitable discourage us from enjoying ourselves.
Yeah, because it's going to be quality. You know, time is quality over quantity, in my opinion. And that's why when I watch interviews with some people who are older in actual years, but they have the energy that's so youthful, and you see them, you know, just shining and thriving, they'll talk about that, that their age isn't the number that they feel. It's this energy that they feel, and they've been working on that. Earlier today, I was actually having a conversation with one of my coworkers about this. I forgot specifically where it is, but it's like this Asian country where they have the longest life rate in years, and it's something like 93 years on average, right?
I forgot what country it was.
Right, and that's cool that they live that long. You know, it's interesting that they live that long. But even then, it's not that long. In the span of the entire world that's billions of years old,
Exactly.
that's 93 summers. You know what I mean? I'm sitting here thinking about how hot it is this summer, but this is one of my summers.
Yeah.
You know, so it's like I'm trying to keep that in mind that it's hot outside, but I'm going to be blessed if I see 90 of these, and that's not that much.
Right, right. And you're blessed if you see the 90 days through the middle of that one summer, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Each day is a gift. It's whatever you're going to make of it. And I like to remind people of that. It's very easy to get caught up in the I guess the autopilot of our routine. I think it's good to have routines and have structure in your life, but there needs to be something that's going to break your mind away from that, whether it's through meditation or doing something new and unexpected. And it's easier said than done because, again, time is finite, and we really load our plates, especially in America. I speak for. We have a lot of expectations of ourselves. We do want to live a certain quality of life and a certain lifestyle. We think comes with that, at least. But there are plenty of people that live below their means and live very simple lives that are still living high quality lives, right? What do you think are some strategies that type of person would be putting in place to be able to do that?
Yeah, I think, habits to exercise your mind and your body, right? And then organizing your space, because if you have a small area and you have it organized, then your brain will feel more organized, right? Every self-help book in the world talks about this. It doesn't take much resources to just organize the space around you. And then doing some type of movement for your body. Well, that could be body weight workouts and things of that nature. But then, like you said, meditating, and you can't neglect the mind work. It doesn't take many resources, but when you meditate on the idea of gratitude, reverence, you meditate on the idea that your spirit is in this moment, you break your perception of what time is. Because there's a difference between time and the moment. Time can be measured, put on calendars, all these different things, clocks, watches. The moment is the only thing that's ever been, ever. You know what I'm saying? So that's where you tap in. Like, that's where you recenter yourself and orient yourself into this grand story that's being played out that you're blessed to be a part of, as you take away your idea of it's 4:35 in the afternoon on Tuesday, March whatever. No, and it's right now. And this is what it's been. It was right now when the dinosaurs were here. It was right now Jesus walking around. It was right now, when the Lakers won the championship. And it's right now, right now. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. And I like that you put it in terms of a moment because it's very subjective. I was thinking you can have an awkward moment, often very brief, and then if you part ways with whoever it was interacted with, it's almost like it never happened, right? In the moment, you're like, oh no, they're going to think this about me forever, and then you both forget it ever happened. But then there's moments like winning a championship, and it's like that quote unquote moment was the whole game, and the after party and that whole experience was a moment, right? And that's something that's cool with pictures, which obviously change over time. You look at pictures of us from the 90s when we were children, and the clothing that people wore and the quality of the cameras that we used, and capturing those moments is so much different now. And you can have a time stamp with it to have a reference point. But when you see a picture, you don't think about the time on the wall. You might think about the day of the month and the year that it took place, but the precise time is irrelevant when you think about those moments, right? But then in our day-to-day, sometimes I feel like for hours on end, especially at work, I'm not someone that enjoys watching the clock at all. I try to structure my day and organize it to where I can kind of just be doing things, right? So I make sure I'm places on time, but then I'm doing my tasks, right? And not having to watch the clock and think that I need to be bouncing back and forth, which is a luxury, right? Because when I work at the hospital, a 12-hour shift, I do need to be on the clock. Like, I have to give meds on time, and I have to call people at certain times, and I have to perform procedures at certain times and transport patients, etc. And that's something that definitely has caused me anxiety at points in my life, because there's a lot of expectations from other people when there's time. And then nobody understands what you're experiencing through those gaps of time, especially when you're by yourself interacting with a patient. whether it's the patient having a conversation or a critical event takes place or what have you, a lot of times that time is disrupted and then there's other people relying on you, right? But when you're able to have control of that time and be efficient, be organized, like you said, I think organization is a really good way to avoid having an anxiety in relation to time. Because people that aren't organized and they don't have that structure in a day, they are constantly watching the clock and they're late places and they miss deadlines and they're always behind, right? But it's because they don't have that structure that it takes to really feel like your place in time is solidified. But when you feel like time is escaping you and you can't catch up, that's a whole different experience, right?
Definitely. And all has to do with what you've prepared for in that moment. I always love to use basketball as an example, right? The best defenders in basketball history, they speed people up. Patrick Beverly, speeds people up. Draymond Green speeds people up when he's defending them. So
breaks their rhythm.
Exactly. They want you to work at a pace that you're not comfortable with, and that's how a great defender works. But a great offensive player is never not in rhythm. Michael Jordan's not going to be sped up. Kobe Bryant's not going to be sped up. I've prepared too much to allow any variable to get me outside of the speed that I want to play at.
Yeah.
And that's all the game is. And that's how life is, right? If you prepare enough, then when stress hits you and moments hit you that are difficult, you're not going to speed up and feel like you're out of control. You're going to be like, hey, I'm still on pace. I'm breathing. I'm now, right? This is gets into all the meditative stuff because you can be like, I'm now, I'm breathing, I'm here. These different affirmations that bring you back to the moment.
Yeah, and you've even heard elite athletes talk about how it seemed like time slowed down, right? Everybody else was moving in slow motion to me, and I was just doing my thing.
Exactly.
You hear it in football, basketball, baseball. I wonder how dudes hit 100-mile-per-hour fastballs, right? They have to be able to lock in and be present in that moment because the baseball's gone in a moment, right?
Yeah, I was just reading about a guy, Sean Green, who holds one of the records for the most runs scored in a game, possibly the most home runs too, but I know it's for sure the most runs. And he is a Buddhist man. And he talked about how they talk about this in Ryan Holiday's book called Stillness is the Key. I'm pretty sure is what the title is. But he talks about how this Sean Green guy was in a slump and he was just speeding up. He kept thinking about his swing and he started thinking about it more and more until he was just not hitting it at all. And then he one day got back to his Buddhist roots and was like, I'm not going to think about my swing. All I'm going to do is just try to empty my mind and swing. And then he said he was just cracking this ball and he was hitting it every single time. And then his last at bat, he knew he could break the record. And he said when he stepped up to the plate, he was like, oh man, I'm hitting great. I'm back to myself. And then he said he caught himself and was like, whoa, this is the same talk that was messing me up when I was hitting bad. I need to ignore this praise I'm trying to give myself to right now and just be in the moment and do my thing. And then he ended up hitting another home run and holding this record.
Nice. That's pretty cool. Because we talk about self-talk a lot, but I don't think we've really discussed how that overconfident or, unrealistic positivity can be to your detriment at times. You have to keep things in line and keep yourself calm. I think that enthusiasm and incitement are good, but they can take you out of that place that you need to be to perform at your highest level.
For sure. For example, we saw Dylan Brooks in the playoffs this year, right? Very enthusiastic. We love his energy. Obviously a great basketball player. He's elite. But his enthusiasm actually backfired on him in the playoffs.
Or at least it looked like it because of how he was presenting himself and what the outcome was.
Exactly.
Right? It's hard to say that if he had changed that enthusiasm or his approach that the outcome would be any different, right?
Sure, yeah.
But only time will tell. Time always tells. And that's what's interesting. Such a concept that you can't grasp. If you do let this time we speak of to run its course, then you'll always get some sort of answer to whatever it is that you are currently confused about, right? Especially if you use your resources. And a good one is the Bible. That's one thing that my dad has been pushing on me recently, the answers in the Bible. And it's another book of concepts to me. There's stories, and I think that stories are so important. Kevin Hart and Jay-Z talked about the gift of being able to tell stories, right? And you have to go through time and experiences to have a story to tell. or at least listen to someone else's experience or gather things that have happened over time. And then it takes time to compile a story. And once you find a way to depict that story, you can lock it in time, right? We have these songs that are available to us from hundreds of years ago. We have movies and shows and texts and all these things that are passing on stories and passing on messages. And we live in a world now that's so much different than 50 years ago, where we have access to all of those stories at once.
Yeah.
And all we have to do is listen to the stories, and maybe we can avoid some of the less favorable outcomes that we've seen over time. People talk about history repeats itself, but I think there's so many people that ignore the stories that have been told over the decades and centuries, right?
Man, 100%. I believe, just like you're saying, it's there as a guide for you. It's interesting you bring up the Bible, and I'm going to try to make a weird correlation, because as you talk about stories, in Genesis, it says, in the beginning was the Word, right? So it doesn't say in the beginning the clock started. It doesn't say in the beginning was the first day of the calendar. It says in the beginning was a Word. And the Word was God. The Word was with God. But the thing is that it was something that to be perceived. So it's almost like in the beginning, there was something to listen to.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And I love that idea, because it's like, it shows that your attention is more important than this clock. You know what I mean? The energy and the actual core of what you're perceiving is more important than if the time has started.
And the perception, again, because it doesn't say what the intention of the word was.
No.
It just said there was the word.
And here you are.
Yeah.
To perceive it.
And be. And there's a lot of lessons that we learn with time, and sometimes we have to experience those lessons more than once.
Man. Yep.
And God willing, we experience enough time to go through those lessons again. But the people that are able to learn a lesson the first go around, you will maximize your time and have more probability of accomplishing whatever it is your heart desires. But me, I just now turned on the video to this podcast. After a significant amount of time went by. But
Sure.
It's not wasted. It's not wasted.
No.
And we're not going to let that disrupt this beautiful conversation that we're having.
Yeah.
And, there's been so many times that in my day, I feel like I have so many things to do. But now that I have my daughter, she makes me slow down. She would want to take a nap when I'm like, dang, we got somewhere to be. And finding ways to utilize my time differently, because I might not have an hour block to do something that I want to do. I might not have the availability at the time that I was expecting, because now I have another human to worry about, right? That makes you value time quite a bit, and value, I think, in a way where I'm a little more free with my time. I'm still as punctual as possible, obviously, but it also helps me realize that when I'm hanging out with a little girl that's coming up on her first year of life, to her, an hour is a lot different than mine, right? That's a very significant portion of everything that she's ever experienced.
Yeah.
And I thought about that a lot, like the first week she was born. I was like, man, it's been like her first day. She just experienced her first day. That's crazy.
Yeah.
And all these things happened in a day. And it was a crazy day for this little baby that has not seen the world before, being in the hospital, having these people come in and poke her and touch her and hold her and kiss her, all these different things that you don't even have an understanding of what those concepts are. Like, why are people kissing me? Like, why are these things going on? And that's one reason I prefer to work with adults in the hospital setting, not being able to explain to kids these things, because there hasn't been enough time. They don't understand hardly any of it. It is kind of sad to see the kids that do understand those concepts in the hospital, because they've been through it so many times, and it's a part of their existence. It's a part of their identity at that point.
Yeah.
There are kids who are known as the sick kid, right? And those are the ones that they really open up your eyes to what it's like to have more of a finite view of life early on. Because I've talked before about how me personally in high school, I felt like I was invincible at one point, right? It wasn't in a destructive way. I was still getting good grades and performing in sports, but I was I would have some reckless behaviors that could have definitely turned out to be a very negative consequence, but I've been blessed for a long time. And when kids have a terminal illness or something and they're going through that same high school experience, for instance, but they're not expecting to have an opportunity to go to college or something like that, I've seen very different reactions to those things. And it does come down to the perception and how they want their time to be spent at that point. And it makes them make a decision of how they're going to spend their time. It can be very negative and depressed and be consumed by all these things that are happening to them, or you can take ownership of the time that you do have and cherish the days and try to push through and be motivated and motivate the other people they come into contact with while they have time to do it.
Definitely.
Right?
Yeah.
And it's been cool to see that perspective. And again, it's like something that breaks my heart. I hate to see. And I think of a couple of people that, we went to school with that we've lost way too early. And being able to also have that perspective and see the same situation, but from someone that has had the blessing of experiencing 60, 70 years, then I'm able to help them realize, you've had these experiences. I know this is awful, but at the same time, you've probably been through something worse or comparable. If not, then you still have the opportunity to push through this, and this can be a big accomplishment for you to make it out on the other side.
Yeah.
But
and there's plenty of stories of human beings overcoming all these things.
Yes, and nobody wants to hear that. Like, oh, somebody else has been through this. Somebody else overcame this, so you can do it. Because that's not always very motivating in the moment, right?
No.
But helping the individual know that this is an individual experience, but you also are just as powerful as all of the people that have tried before you. And all they did was try. The people that were successful, all they did was try, and they came out a victor.
Yeah, that you said so many great things. My mind is stuck on how you were talking about Mila and her first day. And it's crazy because right now in Mila's life, an hour is an amount of time that she could grow. Like, she could literally grow in that hour physically.
She is.
Right. Hour to hour. Once we get fully matured in our growth, as far as our physical bodies and minds and everything, I think we lose sight of the fact that an hour is an amount of time that we could grow, because it's not long, 60 minutes. We've done it a million times, it feels like, right? But your decisions in those times could literally grow you into a whole new person. And depending on how you perceive your time and your growth ability is really what separates people like that go and do great things.
Yeah.
Because they recognize that a little bit of effort every single day turns them into a whole nother person. Whereas Mila's forced to grow because she has no other option. But one day she'll have to make the choice if she wants to grow or not, you know?
Yeah.
And that's the beautiful part about, being a human being.
Yeah. And as much as I don't like watching the clock, I think an hour is a good standard unit of time to try to build things around. There's certain things that I don't like doing for more than an hour. There's certain things that I wouldn't want to do unless I can do it for at least an hour, right? And I feel like the gym falls in between both of those things for me. I like to work out for an hour. I try to get my clients to work out for an hour because going over an hour, then you have more excuses. Bleeding into my day, I have to do X, Y, and Z. But most people can take an hour out of their day to do something, right? And if they look at that hour as an opportunity for growth, then they feel more motivated. And being able to see the progress over time is a lot easier, but also just having an understanding of what that time is and what your intentions are, I think can be very empowering in just going ahead and doing it and then not focusing so much on the product and the outcome, but instead just being dedicated to doing it and then just letting whatever's going to happen. Sometimes that's the best way for me and to me from what I've seen, because that allows people to fall in love with the process. The process takes time, right? And so when you break down the process into units of time and then you find a way to enjoy those units and find a dedication to them, it just becomes a lot smoother.
Sure. That takes faith, right? So faith is maybe a concept that we'll talk about in another podcast, but it takes faith to be able to do that, to be able to trust the process. It's really interesting because how long are you down to have faith for is always the question for people who are trying to be great. Because eventually people are like, if I don't see these results being yielded, then what am I doing all this for? I always liked, what were you going to say?
I was just going to say, like you were talking about with Mila growing from hour to hour, there is a point in our life where we start to decay in that same speed.
Physically. You know.
Well, and, you know, there are mental decays. Nobody's as sharp as they were at 105 as they were at
so there it is.
Right.
There it is, mentally and physically. All the physical ways we decay. And that's why, you know, if you have that perspective of the soul, that it is transitioning, even in a period where your body and mind are decaying, your soul could be just getting stronger and stronger and getting closer and closer to its home.
And it has to be.
It has to be, in
my perspective. Or else that decay will get sped up.
Exactly. Because that's my perspective, is that like the core of us is the soul. And depending on how your soul is feeling, it's going to exude out. And even as your physical body starts to wither, your soul is still very strong. And in my opinion, it could be getting stronger and stronger and growing as you're getting older. Because not only are you literally probably going to die as you get older, but but you're also, your perspective of time, because we talked about the 50-year-old. Now imagine the 90-year-old. You know, imagine the 90-year-old who knows that they don't have much more
I have a 96-year-old that I talk to about these things.
And I'm sure her perspective is so beautiful on life.
She changed mine.
Yeah.
I remember when she was 93 and my response was like, oh, Grandma, I bet you can't wait till that like 100th birthday party. And then she was like, oh yeah, you know, if God keeps me around that long. And I was like mortified. I was like, dang, why would you say that? But then like later on, it's like, well, that's a very realistic answer, right? And I've heard in the hospital, people get admitted to the hospital in their 80s, 90s, and have had a significant injury or a stroke or a heart attack, something that has changed their physical being so dramatically that their mental being is tarnished. But family members aren't able to accept that, oh, they are very fragile at this point and they're not going to live another 5 years. You know, they might make it out of the hospital, maybe, but I've heard people, 86-year-old grandma sitting there and they're like, oh, it's okay. Like they're going to make it to live 100 years old. And I have to ask the doctors to have I can't tell them that that's not realistic. Right. But a younger doctor often shies away from trying to help people have a realistic perspective of the time that they have. And I think that it's so valuable to let people know, because they'll treat the time differently if it has a different amount on it. Right.
Yeah, they will.
And I don't want to ever neglect someone's capabilities, because I have seen amazing things happen. But there's just a point where 86 to 90 is a very far jump compared to 26 to 30, right?
Sure.
Just as far as probability goes and you actually being able to function as a human being. So quality of life is a very important thing to me. And that's something that can change over time quite dramatically, but doesn't have to. And it takes an intentional effort early on. And I think that that's something that we've evolved as humans to be aware of. And that's why there's like this panic and people trying to combat their aging process and keep on to their youth. But we don't understand the most valuable pieces of being youthful.
Definitely. You know, you're nailing it on the head. I remember as my grandma was near the end of her life, who I used to talk to all the time, she would talk to me a lot about God in her like last year and stuff. A lot of the conversations she would have with me is, I feel God calling me home, and I'm not afraid because I know where I'm going, and God has been with me my whole life, communicating with me, and I'm just chilling, about to go kick it with God. Like that was literally her vibe. So it was never that sad. But she also had dementia, so she would forget a whole bunch of things that would matter. She eventually would forget my name. She would forget all these things that, you know, in my perspective mattered. But I will never forget one time as I was driving around with her trying to show her things that, you know, I felt like she would remember. And she was like, I don't know what you're showing me right now. I was playing music and I played an Al Green song, Put It on Paper by Al Green. And she instantly started like bobbing her head to it and singing every lyric to this Al Green song. Blew my mind. I'm sitting there like, I don't even know, like this doesn't feel real right now.
Yeah.
But when you're talking about quality of life, it's like the rhythms of her youth were still with her. The things where she was just vibing to with the person she loved, and the road trips or the radio she would throw on when she was young and just vibe to these songs were still with her. And it was just a big realization to me of like these sounds that we put around us, the like vibrations and the music and the things that we enjoy are really like food for our soul and possibly will never leave you. You know what I'm saying? Whereas the book you read or the movie you watched, like the conversation you had, all those things you might forget with dementia, but like rhythm and vibes and stuff like that, like you're not gonna forget the energies, right? The rhythm, that thing that's like embedded in the world and these songs that we love, like you won't forget.
Yeah, that's a great point. And there is definitely music therapy for people with Alzheimer's and dementia.
Exactly.
And
that's proven scientifically, and it's proven to work very well. You know, and that's something to really think about when you want to talk about time and what matters. You know, the only reason I thought about that is because you talked about quality, and I'm thinking that, you know, you gotta think about what you're perceiving and what's gonna stay with you.
Yeah, it's interesting because over time we find, you know, treatments and cures to diseases, and I know in the thick of it, people feel like it's hopeless. You know, we don't think we'll ever find a cure to dementia. You don't think we'll ever find a cure to cancer, but these are things that I have 99% sure belief that, you know, whether it's in our lifetime or my daughter's or my great grandchildren's, we will have cures to all of these things and we'll understand these things. There's so much of these diseases and diagnoses we have only just discovered and they haven't been able to be researched. And so time is so valuable in putting that effort in just so that someone else can reap the benefits of those discoveries. And I only say that because there are so many other things that within the moment and at the beginning of that time when the experience takes place, it seems like such heavy gravity. And you talk about the soul being the core of our being. I think about the core of the earth and how much gravitational pull there is there. So our soul's strong, the earth's strong, the cores, that similarity there is, I think, very essential for us to be aware of, simply because eventually as things reverse and you're not growing, we start pulling closer into that core.
Exactly.
Just like we talked with physics and the stars, and it's like when a star implodes on itself and there's that gravitational pull, like all of these concepts are interrelated, and they're like one and the same. You can draw your lines in between however you want, and then the perspective of them, whatever concept you have a positive light in, you can change your view of any other concept to feel the same way, right?
For sure. And then check this out. Since we're talking about space and time, we all know, because we've heard through these scientific blurbs, that some of the stars that we see have already died. And since it's space-time and since it's the speed of light, it hasn't traveled to our surface yet. So we still see the light even though it has already passed away in reality. That is similar to how people are. People will pass away, but your memory of them is keeping them alive through some type of process. It's almost like a star that you can perceive in the distance. It's like, I can still see the light of you, but you're not actually there. And I'm trying to make a correlation that might not actually be 100, but you probably feel what I'm saying. It's like these memories that we have of these people is kind of like the speed of light, where it just hasn't actually gone fully yet, even though in reality it doesn't exist.
Yeah. No, my dad gave me a Bible recently that was mine when I was a kid, but I didn't realize we had like my grandpa's death date in the Bible, because there was a spot for that in like family tree and all that good stuff. And I was like, dang, it's already been 8 years since he passed away. It didn't feel like it's been that long at all. And then soon it'll be 10 years. And, It's good to have pictures and, think of conversations and all those things. And I'm so grateful that we have recordings of ourselves, right? Because it's like one day I'm going to be gone and my daughter can look back and at least hear my voice and see how I was thinking when she was a baby, right? If she doesn't have something more valuable that's going to be when she's an adult, at least, if I was gone tomorrow, she's going to have some documentation of me so that light can stay brighter for longer.
Yeah.
But I think about like some of the memories I have with my grandpa, and they do eventually fade a little bit. Even if you do have pictures and stuff, like I don't necessarily remember exactly how his voice sound. I don't necessarily remember how he would react to certain things, right? But I do have certain vivid memories that, to me, in my perception, they're just as strong.
Yep.
But some of those things do change over time, whether we know it or not. And I think that that's okay, because I think that a lot of times they change for the better. It's not like, oh, this memory of me and my grandpa is becoming negative, right?
Yeah.
As long as you know that that's a valuable memory, however you remember it, I don't think is very significant, because time will do its thing.
Exactly. And eventually it has to fade away. Eventually it's just going to be a name on a paper, and it's going to be that star that's actually kind of gone now. And that's okay, because like you're saying, time does its thing,
and it happens over and over and over every single day,
for sure. And in my opinion, that's all the Egyptians and the Mayans were trying to do with their pyramids and stuff, is they were trying to solidify themselves in time. You asked me, without so many resources, how can a person like take advantage of that moment? And the first thing I said was just being what were we talking about? We were talking about being organized. Right? Being organized is a principle.
Right.
And the Egyptians and Mayans put their principles on their walls in hieroglyphic forms and tried to solidify it in time. So then we could see what principles they had that made them feel special. But it hasn't washed away yet, but eventually I feel like those pyramids and everything are also going to go away, everything. They talk. I just listened to someone the other day. So there's a KFC across the street from the pyramid in Cairo, and it's like, did they think when they were trying to solidify their time that eventually like consumerism and fast food was going to get built right next to what they thought was some, heavy knowledge?
I shook my head no immediately, but they knew that there was going to be change. They knew that there was going to be growth. True. They were leaving behind instructions and documents and stories, right? So that people could carry those on and not have to start over. They would have a starting point, right?
Right.
So whatever it is that was going to change about that environment, I'm sure that they had anticipated that. Would they guess that it was going to be a place selling fried chicken? No. But I think that's a valuable lesson for us. We strive for growth, we anticipate growth, but we don't often know what the growth is going to look like. We have an idea of what the end result is going to be, but again, you have to just love the process and push forward, because if you want to put on a bunch of muscle, you don't necessarily know what you're going to look like with all that muscle. You might look bulky and decide that you like being slim better, right? But you don't know, because you haven't been to that point. And a lot of us think that we have this beautiful picture of how our lives are going to be and this map and road of how to get there. And then oftentimes it's not what we expected. But if the process of you getting there was at least enjoyable, then it doesn't really matter what the end goal looks like. Because you know that you're going to keep working, and it's time to work towards that next step anyway.
For sure. And the knowledge that I leave to, the world after me and my descendants and whatnot, I'm going to always make sure that I put that caveat of, this is fluid. Like, I felt like I was vibing in the time I was in, but you need to assess your current situation, because my knowledge might not be able to help you out there.
Right.
So, there's these principles of discipline, and there's these principles of not taking things personal and, recognizing the fleeting nature of time, so then you can try to enjoy it while you have it. Those are cores that I think will always happen, but I don't know what type of government is going to be around. I don't know what type of tyranny, what type of possible devices and technology. So you got to also be fluid with that knowledge. And I think that that's something that a lot of people get hung up on when they look at like old texts, archaic texts, they're like, oh wow, this is the information that's going to unlock my mind. Like, kinda, but then at the same time, you're in
world.
It's a different world.
Yeah.
And if you don't know that you need to like refurbish through your own soul, then you're missing your point of being here. Because you're just as important as any of those Egyptians or the bookkeepers of the 3,000 years ago. Like, you're that person just now.
But yeah, we've evolved. That's what I'm saying. Like, we think about a Homo sapien. We're all Homo sapiens, and this was from Neanderthal to now. We've had this one gap of evolution. It's like, no, evolution's a continuous process. We are part of evolution. So if you're doing things that are not propelling yourself forward, then you're almost pulling back all of humanity because all we're doing is building our next step of our pyramid, right? Ooh. So that eventually somebody's going to make it to the top. We're not going to be around to be alive when humanity makes it to the top of whatever we're building towards, but we know that we're a piece of it. So we have this influence and we have this capability, and we can get so caught up in our own experience, but what we're experiencing is the only thing that's temporary. Everything else going on around us is going to continue, right? So we can have our footprint and have our effects so that everything can continue to flourish. And that's why I believe it's so important to have this feeling of oneness and interconnectedness and not hate thy neighbor, right? Like so many people do.
For sure.
Because one day you're going to be dead.
Yeah.
So why unleash all of this negativity and tyranny and leave a footprint that's going to essentially damage the evolution of all of humanity? That, like, it sounds dramatic to say that, but you don't know how you're influencing the next president. You don't know how you're influencing the next Bill Gates. You don't know how you're influencing yourself, who could be those household names if that's what you're aspiring to do, right?
Yeah.
But each decision that we make is significant in this timeline. Right.
For sure. And you're not in control of the story that's going to be told about you when you're gone. You know, I think a lot of times we'll try to make sure that we control that people have a positive perspective or perception of us, and it's so unrealistic.
Yeah.
You got to let go of that. You got to let go of that, because it's like they could talk. You could get up out of here thinking like, oh man, I set up everything to be so positive, and they're like, oh, do you see how this guy was spitting this wrong rhetoric or weird theology, different things, all types of ways that you could go down as a bad person, just depending on who's telling the story. So you kind of have to let go of how people are perceiving you. And that's a hard thing to do. That's why in my life, I just try to do good deeds, like, and forgive myself for real. Like, I just try to do things that I know are positive, and my reward is always like a feeling in my heart, and that's the only way I can live. But if I tried to go about how people told the story of Russ, and if I worried about when people are talking about me when I'm not there, if they're being positive or not, it would cause so much anxiety in my life.
Yep, I used to be that person, so that makes perfect sense. And it took stages of life, me evolving as an individual, for that to change, right? Because, you know, in high school, there was a time where I was always in the spotlight. And then there's college, a time where I was always in the spotlight. And then I dramatically changed that. I changed my priorities. And then I went back to having a profession where I was often in the spotlight. And then just kind of jumping back and forth between that, but understanding that the times that life has been best to me is when I spent more time perceiving myself and trying to understand myself and really know what was going on inside of me, because I was feeling that pressure from the outside. And it's like that core that you talk about, our soul, needs to stay strong, because otherwise you start feeling yourself kind of collapse in, right? There needs to be structure there. So when you work on the inside and keep this strong inside of you, it's so much easier to deal with whatever BS life is going to throw at you. Because like we said, life's going to throw BS at you eventually. It can't be all sugar canes and Rambos. But I think that when the bad things that have happened to me, if I call them bad things in the past 5 years, each time a bad thing happens, it seems like, if I really break it down, they are worse events. But then I look at how I responded, and it doesn't tear me up as bad. You know, I don't respond as dramatically. I don't carry it on as long because my perception of time is changing. And when those negative things happen in moments, I don't allow them to disrupt very many moments following afterwards anymore.
Yeah, there it is.
Because again, I might not have many moments to experience.
For sure.
So how do you want that last moment to be? Mm-hmm. And this is the second time I've asked that on this podcast, and you guys are going to be like, dang, why are we talking about death all the time? But death is very real.
Yeah, and we are trying to talk about life, and we know the duality exists. So if we are going to get into deep conversations about life, we're inevitably going to talk about death.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I heard someone say that the only way to have truly lived is to finish by dying.
And that's real. That's
Right.
so real.
It's part of the process.
Yeah. And I liked what you said. I just want to highlight that. Like, when you have a bad moment, don't parlay it with more bad moments.
Right.
Like, it's so easy to do that, but you could just stop and try to turn it around. Like, leave those couple bad things and be like, all right, whatever. This is where the forgiveness aspect comes into play. All right, whatever. I missed, but I'm moving on and I'm going to try to make now.
It's hard when somebody else is involved too, right?
Sure.
It's not always just you going through it.
Yeah.
So you might be ready to move on and get over it, but it's like, oh, we still need to cope as a group or as a couple, as a family.
Or as a culture. Maybe even as a race.
Yes.
And that's something that we're dealing with now, to be honest.
And then you get mad at other people for moving on and trying to be joyful and forget about certain things, right? You're like, well, we need to fix this, though.
And it's like, I don't know. I feel like I fixed mine. I'm gone. But it's like, no, you can't fix yours without fixing mine. There's a lot of people that we get into a race conversation that way, because there's a lot of people who feel like if everyone is not doing better in the race, then it's not better for the race. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, if there's one Jay-Z, but there's a whole bunch of homeless people in California, then, like, the fight isn't done. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Know,
of course it's not done, but that's the first step, because we talked about needing to be fruitful before you can multiply.
Exactly. Then Jay-Z can go on to a broadcast like Kevin Hart's show and try to tell people some principles that he's used to make his life amazing. Hopefully you listen and then go get to work. Like, I think that's just everyone who's being great. They probably donate a little bit of their time to talk, and just, you could take their gems or leave it there. I think most of the times it gets left because it's a lot of hard work.
Yeah, and Jay-Z has his albums called The Blueprints, and he talks about the people that he brings on the Rock Nation. He hands them the blueprint so that they can build an empire bigger than his, right?
So real.
Talks about how he put on Rihanna and Kanye and gave them all these resources and tools so that they didn't have to start at the bottom like he did. And that's where you empower the people around you. And that's really the purpose that we should all be trying to exemplify. Because if we think that we're just going to climb on everybody and we're going to finish at the top, then that's pretty much a waste of our time. Because again, your experience ends, but all these other experiences around you are going to continue. So if you make it a goal of yours to help other people start at a higher point, then that is what's going to promote evolution.
Man, and you use the example of the pyramids, and was like, we're kind of building our own pyramid. A lot of people will have these questions. How did they build the pyramid? Oh, they must have had slaves and brutality. Maybe, but in this modern day pyramid, it's like, I would love to pay someone $1 million to lay some bricks. You know what I'm saying? I would love for you to be rich and feed your family off helping me build this pyramid that I think is important. Then we all thrive and we get the pyramid built. It doesn't need to be slaves. I don't need to cut you a terrible deal to try to get you to lay some bricks for me. Like, let me try to get you wealthy laying my bricks. That's how I kind of see the working together and empowering each other to get something built that we all want.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Definitely. I vibe with that for sure. And I think a lot of people make some pretty major moves without having that outlook on their move, and it's definitely sometimes easier to accomplish certain things, or I guess get promotions, not worrying about other people and not worrying about other people's feelings and not worrying about other people's experience, trying to elevate someone else and elevate yourself can be draining and difficult because you're not moving at the same pace, or you might not align with the method, you know, or you might be starting at different points, or might just not really understand each other's goals. But when you're able to collaborate and communicate, I having trouble communicating, and empathize, being able to empathize with other people who are trying to do something similar to you, because that gives you an opportunity to skip out on some mistakes, because if you connect with them, then you utilize each other, and all of a sudden you're maximizing your time because you've had a different experience in your time than I've had. So when we combine, maybe I save time on something that you wasted yours on, and then vice versa. And that happens over and over again, and then there's exponential growth, and that's something that AI is going to be doing for us.
Sure.
Basically trying out all of these different possibilities and running through all these different theories at a more efficient rate, and without the banter between two parties, right? It can do it on its own without the ego, without all of the subjective input. It faces the facts, and it will give us a lot of solutions that we wouldn't have thought we would come to in such a short amount of time. And the speed of those solutions is going to increase dramatically, right? And I showed you an essay that I wrote with AI that was what I think it was at least 2,500 characters, and it sounded like I wrote it.
Seriously?
The way it turned out, I was like, if I had sat here for 3 hours and tried to do that, that's probably what I would have got, you know. And what people don't realize, I keep talking about evolution. AI is a part of our evolution. Our cell phones are a part of our evolution. You go everywhere with your cell phone. It's dang near a part of you.
Yeah.
And that is how we access all of this information. That's how we remain interconnected in this web, right?
Yeah.
So I won't get too into the technological implications of AI right now, because it will really get me off my soapbox. But I would just invite people to do research as to what the capabilities are of AI, because I hear a lot of people still say that it's scary. And if you look at us talk about it 6 months ago, I was a little bit worried about it, you know, but it's another one of those things that, you know, time will tell. There's no reason for me to fear what might happen in the future, because we always are going to have to deal with the anticipation. That's what we are as human beings. We just have things happening and we try to control it, and we have to anticipate and react. We spend years and years and years doing that, and hopefully get more efficient at it. But if you let the anticipation cripple you, then it's going to severely disrupt the flow of you having to deal with all of these different obstacles that life's going to throw at you.
Yeah, definitely. And we get new tools, right? You know, the people building the pyramids, if they had the cranes that they used to build skyscrapers in New York City, it probably would have expedited their process. You know, these chat GBT and AI things are new tools for us. So use it to build your pyramid if it works. right? If it works is what, and from the experience of what you've shown me, as far as coming up with professional sounding material and different points, it seems to work that way. So.
Yeah. Some of the greater implications will be, you know, more physical, right? Less writing, more creating, and more interactive. And I do think that AI is going to be the next piece of our evolution. We talk about we've been a Homo sapien as humans for I don't know how many thousand years, but what would be the next thing to propel us into whatever our next phase is? There has to be a next phase, because evolution is continuous. I saw a guy, he had a device hooked up to his ear that it would send him vibrations of the answers that he tried to think of when someone asked him a question. So he was basically tapped into the AI through his brain. And then Elon Musk gets a FDA approval for a Neuralink brain chip. And it's like, if you just think of all the things that are happening and try to connect the dots, where are we going to end up in 100 years?
It's a great question, you know, and I like to give book shout outs on this podcast. So there's a book called Sapiens by a guy named Noah Yuval Harari, pretty sure. And I might be mixing up those names somewhere. There's those three in some order, but the book's called Sapiens, and it completely lays out a great timeline of like the evolution of the tools and people and their travels and like what it means. And then he does have a newer book called like Deus or something where it gets into the technology. It goes into like his prediction with the AI. So it's kind of like a book series that goes way deeper, you know, into some of these concepts that can make you think, and you know, it's interesting.
Yeah, think about how amazing it was when someone invented the wheel.
Yeah.
Right. And now we have Tesla.
Right. and who's to say that we're more excited about a new Tesla than they were about a simple wheel? They could have a hammer, you know, we have a flamethrower, and like they could have been more excited about the hammer. So it's all subjective, you know, and it's all how much purpose do you have with your wheel? You know, if that wheel changed your life, but that Tesla is just like a status symbol, then you're not gonna be as excited about it. You know what I'm saying? So it's like interesting how those qualities of the tools happen.
Yeah, and it's all perception.
Yeah, you know, this has been an awesome conversation. If you've gotten to this point, you've definitely listened to it over audio. But, you know, so that's the one thing. I might cut this out and put it at the beginning of the episode, but this is audio only. You know, our first audio only episode. It's not going to be a normal occurrence. We're going to get right back to our video, and we'll still probably have some clips from this because we've had some great moments that we have recorded with video. But this is just, you know, one for you to sit back and listen to and think and hit us up and tell us what you thought.
Yes. And again, thankful for the opportunity to have this discussion. Thankful to learn, you know, mistakes will be made always. And I'm getting used to having learning opportunities. Sometimes they come in the form of mistakes. Sometimes they come in the form of just plain old experiences. Sometimes they're big old surprises. So the different flavors of learning are alive and well. And I invite everyone to learn and grow with us and continue to push forward on this journey of evolution. And God willing, we will have the time to accomplish all the things and grow into whatever it is we aspire ourselves to be. And we would be delighted if you do it here with us. Like he said, not available on YouTube, but Spotify, Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Anchor, and clipped up on IG, like he said, at RMB_pod. And guess, like last week, we'll see you next week.
Peace.
Peace.